Welcome to the Church Safety Guys broadcast with hosts James McCarvey, Paul Buckner, and Mike Scully. Together, they make up the Church Safety Guys. Their mission to inspire, influence, and impact church safety teams. Join us for the next hour as we talk about all things church safety and security. Don't forget to like our Facebook page, join one of our church safety and security communities online, and share this broadcast with your church.
Well, good evening and welcome to the Sunday night broadcast of the Church Safety Guys. I am James and I'm joined by my co-host for the evening, Mike. How's it going? Oh, you're on mute.
65 and sunny today here in Texas. We're finally on the great thaw of 2021. So we're getting out of the craziness, but pretty good.
So we've in Ohio we've had low temperatures just like everybody else, and you know the backstory. I was in a small accident in my neighborhood a couple of 2 or 3 weeks ago, and my truck was in the repair shop, and so they did a fantastic job. They cleaned it up, they detailed it. I picked it up, and that was the day that the Midwest got hit by that freak ice snowstorm. So I had to thaw it out today. I haven't had to use it. I had to thaw it out today to drive to church. And while I was directing traffic at church after the service was over, the sun had been coming out. You know, the sun was out because it actually got up to like 24 today. and the sun was shining on it. And I'm standing there directing, the outbound traffic. And I hear this crash. And it startled me, like I jumped, and I turned around, and this whole sheet of ice from the hood of my truck slid off, and then the sheet on the roof slid off. It was just a mess. But my truck looks clean now because there you go.
It was covered in ice.
There's no more ice on it.
Yeah, we're melting today, which is good. But for those that, I think it's probably been on national news, but a lot of Texas has been in blackouts and all sorts of boil water notices and all sorts of cascading issues. So kind of disaster level. But what most of the country doesn't realize is Texas doesn't have plows. They don't have ice melt. They don't have shovels. And when you combine the fact that nobody could prepare the roads with all of the power outages and everything else, and then supply chains started having problems, and so the grocery stores were getting runs and running out of stuff, and literally, so it's just kind of a cascading, almost, I would equate it to almost like a hurricane level event of what hit Texas, and It's going to be weeks digging out of a lot of that. I mean, we got trees down all over the place. There's travel lanes still impassable. The church had a little bit of flooding. We had the fire department in, and they broke a couple of our locks in order to get to some of the different things they needed to do, shut off. So quite an eventful morning.
It was funny. We were talking about it last week, and one thing I hadn't even thought of. You mentioned that the houses aren't insulated for that temperature, and I was watching on the news, and I saw someone ripping away sheetrock. And I'm like, there's nothing in there.
No.
So I'm like, oh, wow, Mike wasn't lying.
No, I mean, when the average annual temperature is 55 to 60 degrees, they just don't build it that way. And I mean, part of that is why the construction cost is cheaper and things like that, because they're not spending all that additional layer of insulation, and they're not building roofs to support the weight load of snow. So with that, let's bring our friends from the north in.
from up in Wisconsin. But yeah, I will bring in, we have Jason and Scott joining us today. So thanks guys for hanging out with us. Jason, go ahead.
No, and I see Scott's even representing the Badgers there. So good on you. I appreciate that. Born in Wisconsin, so I'm gonna appreciate that tonight.
Well, you guys have been on the broadcast before, and certainly, last year at this time we actually did the broadcast live up by you guys in Wisconsin because of the conference you put on. But just for folks that might not recognize you or know who you are, Scott actually helped us with the Protect and Serve. So he's got a piece of that that he contributed to that. So definitely check that out if you have a copy of that devotional. And then Jason is with the Northeast Wisconsin Technical College. That is a mouthful sometimes.
Right.
But we were talking about the subject of doing assessments. And of all of the assessments that I've ever seen, and honestly, and I mean that sincerely, I can't think of two guys that do a more thorough assessment. I mean, you guys tag team it, and it's like the ones that I know that you've sent me, Jason, before were like 40 pages. See, you guys are like the experts on assessment. So I was like, you know what, we need to bring them back on to talk about it. So anyhow, I'll throw it over to you, and I guess Scott, you can start, and just if you would just tell folks your background and a little bit about SAFE in Wisconsin.
Sure. I'm a retired Milwaukee police officer, actually out on duty disability, and moved up to the northern part of Wisconsin at the right time, and got involved in church safety about 4.5 years ago. While sitting through a service at our own church, we had an incident happen where a gentleman stood up and just disrupted the service. We had no security, no nothing. And after it was over, I looked at my wife and I said, "Weren't you scared?" And she normally would be white knuckling it. And she said, "No." And I said, "Well, why not?" And she said, "Because I know you'd have done something." And shortly thereafter, the first church safety and security conference started. And I attended that one. And from there, it just snowballed.
Uh-huh.
Very cool.
Cool. I know. Just from the sake of things happening, a lot of times that kind of prompts us to step in and set stuff up and move forward. So fortunately, nothing serious happened, at least in that situation. But Jason, why don't you go ahead and tell us your background just a bit?
So I was in law enforcement. I had close to 30 years in. Worked for the Fox Crossing Police Department, which is kind of, it's about a half an hour south of Green Bay. In my time there, worked patrol and then moved in the last half of my career in detectives and community policing, more focused in the community policing and the crime prevention. We started to do a lot of security surveys down here for businesses, and was working them as a team. Several of the local police departments are crime prevention partners, and we would work these as a team. And we were pretty successful. It really was kind of happenstance because my two colleagues that were in the adjoining cities had different backgrounds. One worked in the school as a school resource officer, so he kind of had the background of an office person. And then the other one was used to be on SWAT, so he's looking at it from a tactical standpoint. We all kind of played off of one another really well. We were looking at different things and picking up on things that others were. Then in May of 2015, the worst thing happened in our community, and we had an active shooter incident where 4 people died. That really hit home. That really opened up a lot of our eyes, because everybody pretty much is, that's not going to happen here. As much as we prepare and plan for it, it's still in the back of your mind that it really isn't going to happen here. Well, when it did, that really was a punch in the gut. So businesses really started picking up on that, and we started to get real busy with the security surveys. So we used the active threat as a foot in the door to get in to do that security survey. But when we were in with these businesses, we would look at it more of a holistic standpoint and look at what their procedures are. We would look at ways to prevent other types of crimes, burglaries, thefts, vandalism, any other type of incident. I ended up retiring from the police department. That was 3 years ago now, and took the position up here and continued to carry that to do those security surveys. Scott mentioned about the House of Worship conference. We started that 3 years ago, my first year here. That actually was probably one of my first events, if not the first event that I did. But how that came to be was Sutherland Springs. When that incident happened in November, I mean, that was so I was in the detective division at that time. And we had a discussion, the three of us inside typically did not carry off duty. So we thought, oh my gosh, what would have happened if we were in church? You know, and you're trained and you're for 30 years, we carry a gun on our hip. Right? I can't imagine being in church and something happened and we couldn't do anything. So that kind of was the spark to get this House of Worship conference going. So we've been running it for 3 years. Last year, we had 250 people attend. Wow. It just keeps growing in size. We're very blessed to have vendors, to have sponsors to offset the cost of this and make it virtually next to nothing to be able to attend, you know, with what you get, the knowledge and the takeaway from it. So at that conference, that first conference, I still like doing security surveys. I miss that. That's one of the things I do miss is the crime prevention. So there's times where I speak before thinking. So I offered in my district, and Scott's nodding his head. Oh yeah.
You're in good company.
My vocabulary. So I offered to do churches. I would do a security survey for a church in our district, because I was going to travel all over. But if you were in our college's district, I do a survey free. Well, I've done 33 since I started, including the cathedral. I've done the Catholic diocese up here. I've done little small churches. I've got a shrine on my horizon. I've got a few others coming. So we go into these churches and sit down and meet with the pastor and meet with the elders and meet with somebody from the security team. Just kind of look at their procedures and policies, take some pictures, put a report together for them.
He's being generous. He spends a lot more time than just sitting down, chatting, and putting a few pictures together. You've seen some of those reports, Jim.
I have. Yeah, that's why I said I don't think I've ever seen somebody do one as detailed. And honestly, and I'm not joking or exaggerating. I've had the opportunity to work with several different groups around the U.S. where folks have said, "Hey, this is what our assessment looks like." And when Jason sent me one a couple of months ago, and when I started reading through it, I mean, there were things and items and suggestions on there that I was blown away because I would have never thought just different angles. And it's not, Paul always says, like when he's on the show, he always says, you don't know what you don't know. And so having somebody come in, even if you're not in Wisconsin, not in the Green Bay area to reach out to these guys, having someone come in is a very helpful process, because a lot of times, we're so focused on what's going on, with the services and ministries and everything else right here that we're not, stepping back and looking at the whole big picture to adequately assess stuff. So,
I go back to your comment about how in-depth his reports are. I've seen other assessments that are basically check off the box, and he goes into great detail explaining everything.
oh, sure.
A lot of that, I mean, it comes from experience. It comes from responding to burglaries. It comes from thefts, from disturbances. So I mean, you look at the two of us and the collective. I mean, we got. I don't know if I should say it out loud, but we got about 60 years of experience between the two of us. And honestly, Scott probably a little bit more because of Milwaukee, just the size and the nature of the incidents there. But you rely on that. But the ultimate goal with doing these security surveys, which I like, is prevention. Ultimately, we want to detect, deter, and deny a person from striking our church. We don't want to. There's such a focus on how do we react or what do we do, which very important, very, very important, very critical. But honestly, don't we want to prevent it from happening? Don't we? We certainly don't want to ever have to draw our weapon or even confront anybody, or get into some sort of verbal, altercation. We want to prevent that. And then the other aspect with these is we focus on the recovery. That's another thing that's missed too. And honestly, I never thought of it until we had our active shooter event in our community. And the impact, and how do you recover? How do you deal with that? So it's really a holistic type of approach, but it's brought from experience. And I know that there's a lot of agencies, I took our plan that we do here, and I teach a 3-day class. So I teach a class that's about twice a year. I teach a class to officers on how to do this, to go out into their communities and do that. Because they're really the best people to be able to do that based upon their experience and their knowledge and their access to information and to crimes and stuff that's going on in that neighborhood. So we do make a concerted effort to get our partner agencies to be able to get out there and meet with those churches and meet with those community organizations.
For sure. I've actually had recently, and I'll throw it over to Mike, I've had a few local departments actually reach out to me, and one of their biggest concerns is they've said, we have churches that are reaching out to us to ask us to help, and we don't know how to help. We don't know where to start, and so one particular agency is a pretty well off agency, and they have synagogues, some cathedrals, that sort of thing. And, I've been able to step in and kind of help them along, but that's what kind of opened my eyes to what you were just saying about training departments, because honestly, it's not bad. It's a different, it's a different reality that we're in now, that we have to look at different things like that. So Mike.
Yeah, I think it's great that you're out there kind of teaching that prevention component, because I feel like so many churches that I've talked to and see are they're almost floating week to week to week, and they're on what I call in a corporate or technical world would be an incident. Something happens. So, and that can be a loss of service, that can be some sort of impact to your service, whatever that might be. But they treat the problem and not the symptoms that caused it in the first place. And so in tech, you take that incident a bit further to a problem, and you investigate root cause. Once you find root cause, you put mitigation efforts in place so that it doesn't occur again. And I think that's what's really key. I think what we see in churches is that it's two components. One, it's most are volunteers, and they never get to that level of maturity of being able to invest in that sort of focus, because they're showing up on Sunday, and it's great. We need every single one of them. But they show up, it's 10 minutes before service, they're thrust with a radio and a tag for around their neck, and they're quickly said, hey, go to the right side. And sometimes we don't even get a chance to pray with them, let alone have meetings and trainings and get to the degree of not just, all right, here's the business we have to get through of what's going on in our church. And did you see this? And you get beyond that, and then you go to the range for a day. We're not necessarily in our churches getting to this degree of talking about that prevention, going from response into prevention. So I'll let you expand upon that, but I find that that's such a need in the church world.
It is. You take a look at, there's the incident down by James just a few weeks ago with the protesters at church. And granted, I don't know the full story. I just know what was on the news. But chances are that probably could have been prevented, or at least those people deterred on getting in, if they would have placed, some staff members, some greeters or ushers or the security team, whatever they have there, at the front doors, and maybe secured those front doors. We could have deterred them, denied those people from getting in and disrupting that service. Getting into and just working with these churches, it's so interesting. They're thirsty for knowledge. So you go back to our last three church conferences, with the exception of last year that James was at, but the 2 years before we had ice storms, we had snowstorms. Both of those, I kid you not, both of those had days where our college was canceled. Fortunately, our event was off-site, so technically I didn't fall underneath the school rules. Mm-hmm. So we rolled the dice and said, let's go. And we still had tons of people come, which is a blessing, because these are the people that are not told to go to the training. They want to be there. So we found that churches want this. They want this type of training. And ultimately, if we can prevent anything, and Lord knows how many incidents have ever been prevented, but it's preventing is sure worth the recovery or the reaction component.
Yep. Sure. Scott, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, just to go back to the relationship with the police departments. Jason and I this past week were contacted by one of the lieutenants from the largest municipality department here, Green Bay, thirsting for training in this. They reached out to him for that. I probably will be going one day this week with the lieutenant. He's going to a church, wants me to sit down and discuss SAFE with them. It's a working relationship that we see growing immensely.
For sure. Yeah, I think it's interesting because the looking at or thinking about the seminar or the House of Worship conference last year, honestly, there was so much content in that. I mean, just the aspect of, I think one of my favorite parts was having the FBI agent there to explain some of the BAU stuff and that whole component. That was amazing to me. And I sat there and I learned so much, and I'm pretty sure my team is tired of me talking about it. But at the same time, it's, there's always something that you can be learning. And so when you have a situation like that, and in a lot of cases, you're trying to help churches that don't have the resources or don't have an elaborate budget to just do some common practices. The assessment is an amazing tool that can help them get started on the right path, for sure. That church that you mentioned earlier, Jason, down in Columbus, it's interesting because they originally had nothing, and they had reached out to an officer that's a friend of mine and myself, and had said, we want to put together a safety or security team. And so we had been kind of working with them, but you're absolutely right. It's funny because I had people reach out to me and they were like, well, the officer was just standing there. He was in the middle of the sanctuary. Why didn't he do this or that? And I'm just like, well, you know what? I mean, you only see what's recorded. You don't always ever see the entire piece of it, but having it just kind of, I don't know, cemented the fact that having someone outside or doing an assessment, having someone at the doors is far more important than, a lot of times we like to think it is. And that was kind of, with that situation, that was kind of evident that the folks ended up getting all the way in almost to the front of the church before somebody responded and did anything. But the reality is, if you don't know, and again, with the assessment piece of it, if you don't know what to look for or what to think about, because like Mike said, you're volunteering because you want to invest your time, you want to do the best thing. But if you don't have the knowledge, then where do you start? Where do you go with that?
Yeah, that's, so we use crime prevention through environmental design techniques when we go in and do these assessments. One of those techniques is access control. So think of a church. All right. Now, access control. Actually, let's go back and think of a school. All right. A school years ago, when all four of us were in school, it was pretty wide open, right?
Yeah.
Our mom could bring cupcakes at whatever during the day for our birthday and walk in. I mean, seriously, right? Could walk in, not a care in the world.
In ice cream cones.
And bring ice cream cones. There you go, Mike. Yeah. So that must be a Wisconsin thing. I used to get the ice cream cone. Yeah. So, but times have changed. So now access to an elementary school, or any school for that fact, is difficult. It's layered. It's controlled. So we have to take that to a church. Now, a church is different because what is a church? A church is open by virtue, right? Open, everybody come in, welcome you. Often, I mean, I've been in churches where, man, they have like 7 entrances, scattered all over, from up in the front by the sanctuary to the back, wherever, the sides.
We have 23.
You have 23. Oh, man. I'm not coming down to do a survey, James. No. So how do you control that? How do you see who's coming in? How do you control that? It's so hard nowadays to get people to be ushers and greeters, let alone to be security. So you have to rely on all of those people to take a position and greet and watch people coming in. Well, if you have 23, that's not going to happen. So with a lot of these churches, we tell them, let's limit the number of openings. Let's limit the number that people can come in. And you can do that relatively easy without making people traverse really far. But then you have those entrances monitored, and something like that happened in the cathedral down in Columbus. That's something that, if they only had 1 or 2 entrances there and had an usher, a greeter, or whatever, watching that, they could monitor and see what was going on. So that's one of the things that we work with when we do these security surveys is how do you control that access? Now some churches are going to the point where after the first hymn, they're locking her down. It's outdoors locked. But then some churches are like, I just don't know if I'm there. Me personally, I just don't know if I'm at that point where we need to lock doors. I mean, I get it from the security, the cop hat in me is all for it. But the church guy, I'm not feeling it. It should be open. But we have to take steps to be able to watch that.
And I find that some of that is driven off of volunteer strategies that aren't necessarily looking at not just because they have so many doors, but adequate staffing, period. Looking at it from a standpoint of what's the objective of what we're doing as any ministry, not just security team, but look at any ministry and say, what's our objective? What do we have to cover? What are we trying to do? but then planning your schedule in such a way that maybe says, okay, we're going to try to schedule for 4 doors, but you know what, if we get 3, these are the first 3 we're going to open as we get teams arriving on Sunday morning. If we get enough, fine, we'll open the 4th door. But understand that this door may not be always open. So if it's locked, that's why. And it's just about communication at that point. But it's having those plans in place for staffing. Resource planning is where they need to look at it. And I think the challenge there is, again, it comes back to volunteers. And you're having volunteers that have never been trained in resource planning trying to staff a team for an unknown set of positions that fluctuates. So again, it's consistency and communication. But yeah, to your point, Jason, it's that access is that starting point. We need those choke points so that we can control them with people, not just with technology.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then on top of it too, you throw in COVID, and all of a sudden it's like a third of our church isn't there anymore, which I'm not trying to say it's a conspiracy or whatever. I mean, however you fall on that spectrum with COVID, I'm just saying as an operational standpoint, what we've had to do, and we did it today, was a few of our safety folks also turned into greeters, right? Because we do that anyway. But I've worked with several of the pastors over, our first impressions, ushers, greeters teams, to kind of blend some of that and say, look, you know what, you're standing by the store, you're watching, you have a radio on, but you can greet people as they come in. And I think it's working really well. But I think churches are having to be a lot more creative with that process, and just trying to understand that. We're going to go ahead and take a quick sponsor break, and then when we come back, we'll talk more about the assessments, and I want to talk a little bit about SAFE too in Wisconsin, and just kind of give you guys the chance to talk about that a little bit too. So hang with us, and we'll be right back.
With over 50 years of experience with religious and nonprofit organizations, Thomas Alexander Insurance & Associates understands that your congregation is different from a traditional business. We're here to fulfill your needs, coming to you while creating a personal plan for your budget and size. From your local community to around the globe, we are advocates for you. Thomas Alexander Insurance & Associates, your partner in service.
Church Safety Guys is a nonprofit organization dedicated to help inspire, influence, and impact church safety and security teams. We are about all things church safety and security, which starts with a ministry mindset and a servant's heart. We're protectors, guardians, ambassadors, and shepherds. We help church and place of worship safety and security teams all over the United States through our broadcasts, online communities, conferences, trainings, resources, and products. Help us reach more churches in impactful ways by considering becoming a monthly ministry partner. $2, $5, $20 a month will help us continue to provide these resources.
Okay, so welcome back from the break. Real quick, I did just want to make an announcement. If you're listening to this at a later time on YouTube or one of the podcast platforms that we use, the movie that we have coming out, Miracle on 4th Street, that's actually coming out this Friday. And so that'll be available to stream on demand through our website and through our Vimeo account. So if you have any questions about that, or you're interested in checking that out, that will be out, like I said, this Friday. We'll be releasing it, and then I think we have it about a week. But definitely something worth checking out. So we're talking tonight with Scott and Jason, and we're talking about handling property assessments. And so I wanted to go back. We were just talking about having somebody at the doors and kind of juggling that. But I want to go back real quick, Jason. What are some of the simple things that you look at when you do an assessment that maybe the average person doesn't always see that you can mention?
A lot of the big differences can be made in procedurally, not so much physically. So we look at that. We look at do we have people monitoring those doors? It doesn't necessarily have to be a security person. Greeters, how are the greeters interacting with the people? The minute that you communicate with someone, or you say hi, or a stranger, whether they're there to come to church or they're there for something else, just by what their reaction and what they say back. So it's teaching the people how to pick up on those clues. Simple things inside the church, just as like locking doors in after hours, or using the locks and stuff of what you have there. I was a crime prevention reporter for one of our local TV stations here for a number of years, and my chief always used to razz me on being on there saying, how often are you going to tell people to lock their doors? And I would say, well, it's a little bit more than that, chief. But I mean, he really did have a point. But we go into these surveys, we look at the outside, the outer perimeter, we look at getting into the building, and we look at within, what are we protecting asset-wise, from parishioners to the offering to the items in the sacristy. So how are we securing all of those? You made reference, James, about always learning. And I've done well over 100 security surveys as a whole, from high-rise buildings to a little 1800s church way up north. And I always learn. So a recent church, I believe it was the report that I sent you, one of the reports, it was a church that was built in the 80s. And it had that architectural design where the landscaping was sloped up about halfway up towards the wall. And then there was a little bit of windows, and then you could get access to the roof. So the people were very paranoid about somebody getting access to that roof, particularly an active shooter, and start shooting down. Well, the odds of that happening are slim. In fact, going back to 2000, there's only been 3 active shooters from an elevated position. Everyone has been. But not to say that somebody couldn't access and break into the church through that way. So learning, I'm always learning. So I look at that and I'm like, all right, I got a conundrum here. Let me think. And I'm never afraid to tell folks, write down, and I'm throwing out ideas, and I'm like, let me think on this. I'll get back to you. So what we ended up recommending, one of the recommendations, they had a previous person come out there and do the assessment, was to put a barbed wire fence. I mean, it's a church. That's just not. Would it work? Yes. Is it practical? No. So we recommended putting the anti-bird deterrent up. So if you know what I'm talking about, they have, it's usually on like parking lot lights and stuff where they don't want birds to land. So they put these, it almost looks like nails sticking up, small nails. So that was a recommendation there, is to line that top of the roof with those nails or those pokey things. So if somebody were to grab and to lift themselves up, they'd hit those nails or those spikes. But yeah, if somebody needed to get up there for maintenance, you could put a ladder up, step over it. And it was something that you put these little nails are not very big. So people really, there would be not noticeable. It was something, just a little bit of Googling. Google can be your friend, and find stuff out. And it was an easy, cheap, inexpensive way for them to be able to do that and alleviate a lot of concerns. So I'm always learning. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I'm still, oh my gosh, I work at a college, but I still, you can never stop learning.
Amen. For sure. Scott, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're getting the point across that these assessments are not focused solely on the active shooter. This is for other things as well. I just read an article recently in the Christian Emergency Network that is saying that as of February 1st of this year, vandalism throughout the country at houses of worship is on a tremendous rise. And some of the things that Jason talks about when he goes through and does these assessments is geared not totally toward that active shooter, but toward the entire property. And I think that's important to realize, that the assessment is not just focusing on the active shooter.
Yeah, we've had here in Northeast Wisconsin, we've had a burglary through a steeple. So they shimmied up and scurried down through the steeple or the bell tower. We've had a medical emergency where the person stepped on the gas in their car and drove through the church as it was in session and landed inside of the church with their car. We've had a burglary where a fire was started inside of a church. We've had thefts. Fortunately, knock on wood, God bless, that we have not had an act of threat or a violent act. But you're more than likely to have some sort of property crime. And we look at that, if oftentimes it is the active shooter that gets us in the door. But if I'm going to be out there for a couple hours walking around, if I'm going to be putting, 3-4 hours putting a report together, I'm going to look at everything and do it right and give them a package. If we're going to be taking all of our time doing that, let's give them everything and work on preventing everything.
Sure.
And that's great, even from somebody externally. Sometimes I think we're all in a bubble and we can walk past that same open door 17 times. And to us, it's not jumping out at us, or something wrong it's not a doesn't look right to us. It's always like that.
Right.
But somebody else can look at it and ask maybe it's not 7 whys, but they might start asking why. And we get to that root cause again. And I think that's important. I was walking the perimeter of my church this morning, and we noticed a little piece of flashing on one of the back doors is shimmied, a little bit jammed, as if somebody tried to break in. Well, I'm not surprised. There's a large contingent of homeless in the Austin, Texas area. We just went through sub-zero temperatures, of which, heck, the people in their houses are not prepared, let alone those that are not in houses. Right. And yet somebody tried to jam open the back door. What they didn't know is that door literally goes nowhere. It's the back wall of our stage inside there. So they got nowhere with it, but we have to notice those things. And so that's not just in an assessment that says, hey, you know what, this door might be vulnerable, as in the proactive look, but in the reactive, as we go around and say, you know what, somebody tried to get in there. What do we have to do? Okay, that one's fine, because if they got beyond it, it's not a risk. But what if they shimmied that door? What would we do? And start proactively planning for those contingencies and then actively mitigating. I think one of the great things about that is, and probably what they're doing with that report, when I talk to different churches and I'm giving them different advice when they're asking questions, I try to frame everything I come back to them with in 3 buckets: act, recommend, discuss. ACT is something that says, look, I've seen this across every church. This is a best practice. You should do this in order to line up to best practice. Recommend, we highly recommend you do this because it's best practice, but we understand that there could be certain mitigating circumstances, things and decisions in your church, et cetera, that may have led to why this is this way. So we understand that. Discuss is just that. Let's have a conversation and say, we hope that we can find a way to work around this piece and discuss it. But we understand, again, it's your house of worship, it's your church, it's your. There's circumstances that led to decisions, or they might never have actually covered it. So that discussion may be the first time to chat about it.
For sure, I think that it's definitely. If you do that, and again, I know a lot of churches that have kind of skipped that step because they've made the choice and said, you know what, we've had our own folks walk around and assess it because we've been here for years and we know how to do it. And the reality is, even just getting away from that checklist like that you were talking about earlier, Scott, and realizing that, someone that's never been there can see different things and different aspects and have different opinions. That in itself is worth the value of having someone come out. Certainly my recommendation would be and I know you guys feel the same way, if you're going to have someone come out, make sure that they have the experience of doing that to back it up, versus somebody just coming out with the insurance company provides all sorts of checklists. You can walk around and do that, but the insurance company doesn't always think of what environmental factors would be. Like, what's your neighborhood look like? Okay. That's not on the checklist. That's if your church, my church is actually in a pattern or path of homeless folks. And so last summer we had probably 6 or 7 different instances where homeless folks came through and were trying to break in. We're trying to get into some of our church vehicles and, do all of this stuff. Now we help them. And we have a homeless shelter in downtown Columbus, but at the same time, again, that's more of a neighborhood based realization that a lot of times somebody that has just the checklist isn't looking at, what's going on in the neighborhood, what's happening. Are you a high crime area? That information, you can go on most public record. I know I can go on the City of Columbus's website and pull up all the crimes that's happened, in my neighborhood. And certainly there's different apps that you can use to follow what's going on. I have a police and a fire app for the City of Columbus that tells me, every time there's an emergency call or something like that. Okay, here's what's going on in our neighborhood next to the church. Does that impact the church at all? We had a car accident a few years ago. We had a car accident happen in front of our church, and it hit a gas main, and it actually shut down all of our service on a Wednesday night because after the fire department had blocked off the road waiting for the gas company, there was no way for anybody to get into church. So, stuff like that, it happens, but my point, I guess, is just someone coming in from the outside that has had that experience has a bigger tendency to look at that from a broad picture and not just that checklist mentality.
Well, and even to expand on that is the networking and knowing what's going on. And that's where Scott's group comes to play with SAFE.
Yeah.
Is all of these churches, we have a clearinghouse that we can share information. Is no different than in law enforcement. We have in Wisconsin, we have the Wisconsin Law Enforcement Network and the fusion centers and stuff that share what's going on, because crime doesn't know just one jurisdiction, just one congregation. If they're very successful, Scott just shared scams. that were running around up north on the border between us and the UP. So these scammers are going to be very successful at one parish. They're going to start hitting others. So that's where, and I'll turn it over to Scott though, because that's his thing. But sharing that information is huge.
Well, one of the most cost-effective tactics in the crime prevention is communication. We talked about it before. Open lines of communication, networking with people. This safe and faith-filled environments actually got started about 2.5 years ago. And it started out at the first Church and Safety Conference. John Flannery, one of the original organizers of the conference, thought, why don't we see if there's people that want to be involved in a closed email group that we can share information, not for general dissemination, but things that are happening that, certain maybe teams or people need to be aware of. That started out with 20 people. As of 2 days ago, I'm now at 187 individuals statewide, 2 out of state, and including the houses of worship, or breaking it down by house of worship, in the state, I have 133 houses of worship that are participating in SAFE. It's twofold. There is the closed email group that we share pertinent information with. And then there's also a newsletter that we started about a year ago. Jason and I basically bounce things off of one another, and that goes out as well. And the way it works is the people in that email group will contact me. Now, most recently, I had an individual at a church here in the Green Bay area reach out to me about some groups they share a parking lot with the church. There are some open businesses in there, and they had some issues, and they were looking for feedback on what they could do. I put the law enforcement hat on and kind of explained to them what their options are. And, you kind of go from there. But Jason mentioned that scam. I got wind of it, as he said, in the upper part of the state. And when I threw it out in the email group, I got a bounce back from somebody right here in our backyard in the village of Howard, who said that they've had their parishioners fall into the same scam. It's important to get this out there. Too many times, I think our houses of worship, they tend to operate in their own little bubble, and they don't share information. My church is a prime example. They didn't want to do that. And we got to get them to break that and have active lines of communication. That's the only way that we can provide safe places of worship for all.
Yep. Well, and it's interesting you say that, because I remember when I was at the last conference talking to several churches up there, and it was interesting, and I've talked to folks down here for sure before too. But what always gets me is that people are like, "Well, that's not my denomination. Right. We're gonna stay where we're gonna stay." And yet, to me, I mean, our church. The church I go to is a larger one in size, and across the street from us, there has been a Methodist church there for years. We're considered an independent Baptist church, and the reality is, there's been things that have happened where I've walked across the street and said, "Hey guys, I'm just giving you a heads up," and everybody looks at me like I'm crazy and weird, and I'm like, look, if somebody's that concerning to me coming here to do something, what's to stop them from going across the street too? And I think you're absolutely right. Once we get past that mentality, I think churches will be a lot more safe, because it's not about take, and so many times I hear people saying, well, I don't want to pull somebody from another congregation or church or whatever. And it's like, that's not what it's about. What it's about is making sure that in the community, that faith is represented, and it's represented safely for whoever goes there. So
it's the same thing. I mean, law enforcement, us in law enforcement, we don't care what the patch says on each other's shirt or what color the squad car is. We have the same job, and the same stuff happens in each community.
Yeah.
It's the same with churches. It doesn't matter what denomination or what. I mean, it's the same thing.
We're not McDonald's.
Back to that ultimate goal. It goes back to the ultimate prevention. We just want to prevent this. That's the thing. And so many programs miss out on that. It's like, geez, we need to prevent this stuff from happening. And the more stuff that we can do, be it the assessments, be it the sharing intel or information through SAFE, and even the trainings. It just prevent the darn thing from happening. A church needs to be a safe place. A church needs to be a place where we can go and forget about everything else that's going on in the world. I mean, good Lord, it's terrible, but I mean, a church really needs to be a place where you leave everything at the door and go in and just chill.
For sure. As we wrap up real quick, and I'll let Scott wrap up too. I do want to mention, I did post a link, and because of the college and COVID and everything, you guys are actually moving the class online this year. Instead of doing a conference, it looks like you kind of split it up into a 3-part series.
Yeah, it's actually something different. We're not moving the conference online because that would be too big, and technology and I are parting ways. So I don't even want to try that. My colleague here had issues getting his video on. So, us knuckleheads in Wisconsin here. But I've been trying to get classes online, and I'm just not an online guy.
Yeah.
And I've had this idea since COVID started to do these webinars. Well, you can see how my life has been. About a year into COVID, I finally have gotten it. But basically, what we ended up doing, I did a series of talks for school district administrators, 6 of them. I just kind of lumped them together into 3 sessions and put a church tweak on it. But we cover everything from an overview to detection, prevention, to how do we react, and then ultimately how do we recover. So just 3-hour-long, 45 minutes to an hour. And then I think people are getting zoomed out and WebExed out. So I didn't want to do it too long. But we're itching to get back and to have this House of Worship conference. We just skated up, right? We had that in just before the ceiling collapsed on us last year.
Yeah.
But I mean, my phone's been ringing off the hook to get folks back. So I can't wait. Next year, we'll be back at it.
Well, we'll definitely. I did share the link in the comments, and I would definitely encourage anyone that's listening to check that out. And as we get closer to the dates, we'll definitely share that posting, because I mean it's $15, and I think the content honestly is, I mean that's ridiculous. It doesn't even cover your cost of time for doing it, and the content I think would be very beneficial to anybody. So we'll definitely share that. Scott, I'll throw it over to you. You wanted to add something?
Yeah, just to give you an idea of the makeup of the individuals that participate in SAFE, that bounce information back and forth. I have 19 different members of the clergy. I have 2 chiefs of police. I have 2 law enforcement supervisors, 3 sheriffs in the 3 county sheriffs, the FBI special agent in charge of the state of Wisconsin, 2 of his agents, and a regional director of the International Conference of Police Chaplains. Mm-hmm. There are so many people that want to be involved in it. And the information that it's not just taking the information from the people that are sending it to me. I'm getting it from Department of Homeland Security, from InfraGard, from the Southeast Wisconsin Threat Assessment Center, from you. I'm constantly watching what you're throwing out there and sharing it. It's all about that communication.
For sure. I know. And I definitely, I know there's been a few times. I mean, I live in Columbus and I hadn't even seen that the film that the two of you sent me about the church in Columbus. And I'm like Googling it and I'm like, what is going on? My friends up in Wisconsin are sending me stuff that's happening 10 minutes away from me before, but you're absolutely right. I mean, and the nice thing about it is there's no cost. I mean, I know you guys, you know, you do your best to, and beyond your best to offer, you know, offer quality content, quality classes, quality information at almost no cost whatsoever. And I mean, we do the same with information, but, you know, I've taken several classes through CTED and Northeast Wisconsin Technical College. And I can tell you, it's not like when Jason says he's going to do a webinar, it's not like a 2-minute webinar. It's like, this is solid information. So it's definitely worth checking out those two resources, and go on Facebook. Actually, I did share the link for SAFE, so people can go on there and check it out. And then if you have any further questions about that, feel free to reach out to us, and I can get you in contact with one of the guys, or I can pass along their information. So I'm going to definitely appreciate you guys coming on tonight. I'm going to toss it over to Mike for some closing thoughts, and he'll pray us out, and we'll call it a night.
Yeah, thank you, gentlemen. I know we could probably go on for another hour or two and go into as many rabbit holes as perhaps you have pages in those reports, Jason. But at the same point, I think there's so much rich content here in what came out tonight, and appreciate what you gentlemen are doing in northern Wisconsin. I echo what James has said, and to your point, Scott, is people just that are in our capacity. If you're on a safety team somewhere, you don't need permission to go talk to the church across the street. Just go and be a disciple and go talk to them. They're another fellow human being. They're another person who's trying to serve in the capacity of taking care of the flock. Just open the door and get started. So I applaud you, gentlemen, in what you guys are doing, and appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you.
With that, absolutely. With that, let's pray us out, and we'll go from there. Heavenly Father, thank you for this opportunity to put forward content in helps of facilitating a church services all over this country in delivering upon that objective. We are facilitators. We are protectors. But we're there trying to create safe environments. And those safe environments, Lord, sometimes requires that proactivity, that communication, that going above and beyond what we do and checking those boxes on Sunday. So bless the folks that are here listening tonight. We thank you for that, the chance to reach more people. And we thank you for our guests who are doing so much work, not just in Wisconsin, but all over, and impacting not just churches, but beyond that. And we ask you to bless them not only in the week ahead, but in that continued journey as they help continue to do your work, Lord, and help churches be safe. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. So just a quick reminder as we wrap up, join us next Sunday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we will, I think next week, we're going to actually have an ER doctor on, and he's going to be talking about some first aid things, schedule permitting. But also check out our website for additional resources, and the Miracle on 4th Street movie coming out this Friday on demand about Sutherland Springs. So take care. As always, reach out to us if you need anything, and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks for watching.
Thank you for joining the Church Safety Guys broadcast. We hope that you found it informative, and we appreciate your feedback. Looking for ways you can help us reach more churches? Share our broadcast with your teams. Consider becoming a monthly ministry partner. Like and share our page, and join the discussion in our Facebook groups. Visit our website at churchsafetyguys.com for other great resources. Remember to keep a servant's heart, a mindset of ministry, and Semper Disciplina. Always be training. Have a blessed week.